Hi, everyone. This is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Live, and today we have Brian Johnson, as usual, once a month, although it's been a while. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good, Rico. How are you?
Good, good, thanks. So this is our prime lunchtime with the city manager. We get to talk about different things. In this episode, we're going to be talking about redevelopment, rezoning, things that are going on in the city that has to deal with development and redevelopment, just to catch up about what's going on with several different properties. So be a good show to be able to talk about what I think is on everyone's mind, especially with the economy moving the way it is and interest rates and all that. But before we get there, I just want to thank our sponsor, EV Remodeling Inc. and Eli, for supporting our journalism, our podcasts, our magazines, for being a good corporate sponsor and good corporate citizen with us. So thank you, EV Remodeling and Eli. Check him out where they do design, build, and renovation work. He lives in Peachtree Corners, great family. We just had a recent article on him as well, talking about what he's doing. But visit them at evremodelinginc.com. And check out, hopefully, you all, by the time you get the podcast, listen to it, you'll be having received this or not. This is the latest issue of Peachtree Corners Magazine. Wesleyan Artist Market will be, and we're a sponsor of theirs, will be happening April 28th and 29th. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, and good to see you, Brian. It's been a while, been a few weeks, a little over a month actually, I think.
Yeah,
Um, and you all have been busy, like always. I've been speaking to Lewis, the communications manager, and so much going on in the city. And we could talk about a lot of things, but I think zoning it down to development and redevelopment, I think for this episode makes a lot of sense, especially talking about it before we started rolling, talking about how different properties right now, because of the economy, right? Interest rates are going up. Commercial properties, commercial development is adjusting, I think, to the marketplace a bit more so than the home market. I think it's being affected. But several properties have put a break, I think, on some of the development work. I know the Charlie Roberts property, what we call that hole in the ground, if you will, behind Chase Bank, where North American Properties was going to possibly develop an apartment complex there, is on hold now because that deal sort of fell through, and now it's being marketed separately. But so there's a few things going on like that. So can you share with us, Brian, like, you know, maybe, what's going on with some of these properties? Why are they being stopped? Why are they stopping the development and all that?
well, Rico, you're right. You know, as development goes, the typical cycle is a developer or a property owner will come to the city if they need a rezoning, and they'll come to the city and only have gone so far as to come up with, is my project feasible? I've got to produce enough for the city to know what I want to do. So there's a lot of conceptual work, a lot of engineering, those kind of things. But they'll only get to that point because there's no guarantee that they are going to be successful in their rezoning request. And why that is,
Mm,
why, how that's affected, or when the economy changes, is that most of these developers, even with favorable zoning decisions by council, they
hmm.
have not gone to the next step of lining up and locking in their financing for the actual construction because they didn't know if they were going to even get approval to do it.
Right.
So we run into, and real estate's cyclical, but we have run into a number of properties that were rezoned in 2022, maybe even late 2021,
Hmm.
that got favorable zoning, and then they would go in and start the actual, you know, design documents, the construction documents, the
Right.
detailed ones that the you know contractor will build off of. That takes a while, especially the bigger it is. It could easily be a year where the
Mm,
architects and engineers are creating those construction documents. And if the economy changes in that interim period of time, when it's time for the property owner or developer to go to the banks and get financing, sometimes there aren't terms that they like,
Hmm.
or the banking industry has changed to where they require more collateral, or the banks don't have enough equity to loan out, or whatever. And
Mm.
so we have seen that over the last 6 to 12 months, especially
Yeah.
6 to 9 months, where interest rates started climbing, and certain developers put kind of pumped the brakes and said, we don't like these terms, let's maybe hold off a
Right.
year and see if they improve. Then you've got some of the banking issues we've had of late with these mid-tier banks like
Right.
Silicon Valley Bank and everything
Right.
changing. So now you've got the feds are more involved in the equity requirements that banks have to have, and
Well,
that's affected. And so, yes, we've had a number of favorable rezonings here that right now are on hold to a degree indefinitely. So the only ones that I can, say are for sure moving forward,
hmm.
that have had favorable rezonings recently, because mostly because they already had the money locked in and ready to go, would be Waterside continues to move forward.
Yes. Right.
They're in phase 2. They, are basically done with the first third of the property. Now they're moving into the constructing the middle third and the clubhouse and the
Hmm.
shared facilities, and then phase 3 would be the institutional use, the memory care
Right.
type of thing. But their money's already been locked in, so they're continuing to go. Intuitive is definitely moving forward on their first really 2 phases, but they had a
Hmm.
third phase that wasn't going to slated to start for another 2 years anyway, but they have
Hmm.
kind of, I think, stopped a little bit of the work on that. That was,
Hmm.
really demoing some existing buildings and building even bigger ones to house some of their HR. There's a welcome center they were going to have, some
Right.
things that maybe weren't or aren't considered critical,
Hmm.
what they want to ultimately do. But there's, been a little bit, I mean, so
Yeah.
what you see,
Those. Yeah.
the
I noticed
assembly
those.
is happening.
I noticed those sales, intuitive robotic sales, have slowed based on some of the reports I read on them. But their work, anyone that passes through Technology Park, I mean, they continuously, I mean, those cranes are up, they're working, they're dumping, and soil's coming out and stuff. So they're definitely working over there every single day. So it's not like they stop. There is a piece of property, I think, that was cleared or some work was done, but then they put the brakes on that development. I don't recall which property that was. Um, that I thought, I don't know if it was cleared, but they started some work on it and then they stopped. Um, but
Near
there's other, which one?
near intuitive, you're talking about near intuitive's location?
No, yeah, it might have been that. Maybe it was near there. Um, Someone had
I don't
said
know
something
of
like
any that
that.
have been cleared and officially placed, had the brakes put on it.
Yeah,
I know the Jewish Chabad cleared their
yes,
property, but
right.
I've not heard that they've officially put, you know,
No, yeah, no, I think they're still moving ahead with that, I think.
yeah.
I heard something like that.
But intuitive, their main assembly area, their
Mm,
training, their expanded training, their sales office, all that stuff. They're moving people
yeah.
from California. They're actively hiring.
Oh,
So,
yeah. Yeah.
that's still going forward. The one on Peachtree Parkway is a 5720 Peachtree Parkway. I think it's
Hmm.
called Broadstone, the mixed use there. You can see that. That's another one that had the financing locked in before interest
Yeah.
rates started to change. So they're going to finish that.
Okay.
And then North American Properties will and is moving forward on the forum.
Hmm.
I want to say
Yep.
it's next week or the following. They're kind of breaking ground on the first part of their call it, enhancement, and that is they're going to be
Hmm.
removing the middle parking spaces in um, the
Right.
northernmost section
Right.
by
By
Jason
DSW
Kelly.
and stuff.
Yep,
Yeah.
Ayumi, that
Yeah.
section, and then they're taking the old Canuckins uh,
Yes.
space and they're putting in
Hmm.
the food hall.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
are moving forward on getting the parking deck designed.
Hmm.
It's under design. It's got another step when the design is at a point where it's worthy of consideration. It's got to go back in front of council. That was the only
Right.
condition that required them to go back to council. And so
Right.
they're designing it. There's going to be some conversation with the residents in Amberfield that reside right along the forum.
Sure.
So there'll be
Sure.
some dialogue with them on
Yeah.
what it looks like. But that parking deck, their hope is to have the design approved and then they start construction on that sometime in the summer.
Okay. Yeah, I
And
think they want to finish by the end of the year or first
yep,
quarter 24 is
correct,
what I
because
understand.
they can't remove any more of the middle parking stalls beyond that
Hmm.
northernmost section they're getting ready to do
Right.
until the parking deck has been completed.
Hmm.
But they are moving forward with that. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
I bring that up to say they're
I'm,
still moving forward. But
yeah.
beyond that, pretty much all of the other ones that have come through with favorable zonings
Hmm.
have kind of, in some cases, officially informed the city that, hey, we're not we're not working on this right now, so don't expect anything from us. We've put a
Okay.
you know put this on hold until marking conditions improve.
Right. Right. I guess the residential stock in the city will be on hold for a little while, other than the Broadstone and the Watersides. Um, yeah. So interesting. The economy does affect everyone.
Oh,
We did an market overview for a recent issue, and I was looking in Peachtree Corners just to see what was listed, right, just on Zillow, let's say. And I think I only saw two homes being up on, and this was back in February, so before spring came. So I'm sure there are more houses on the market now, but there was like I think only two back in January, February that was on the market. Um, yeah, so I mean, higher rates. What is it, 6.5% now for a 30-year mortgage residential?
yeah.
Um,
And less banks have the equity that they did before because they're becoming a little
yes,
bit more cautious on how much,
yes,
and how risky
right.
the applicant might be. And so
Hmm.
it's definitely affected things. And then, you're right. Housing, as it stands right now, housing is a difficult thing. Of course, it's a difficult thing for everybody right now. I mean, nationally, there's a housing shortage.
Right,
Problem, we have is unless we have some annexations, and even then,
mm,
there's not a lot of annexation opportunities of undeveloped parcels. But just with our current corporate limits,
hmm,
we are pretty much tapped out on single family, homes. I mean, there's nowhere
yeah,
else for somebody to at least cost effectively build a bunch of single family residents because all that property has been used up. Now, there are the one offs where somebody buys, tears down the existing house, and builds a new single
right.
family development on it. Um, and,
Or townhomes. I mean, the
well,
Medlock
yeah,
Bridge
that's not
Road.
detached. That's not
Right,
detached.
right, right, right. Yeah,
But yeah, so to your point, so then what
but
we
then
have
the mhm,
is other housing products other than single
yeah.
family
I
detached.
mean, it's still equity product, still ownership, right?
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The
But
the problem
yes,
the problem with that though is that I find is that if all of a sudden there's 20 townhomes being built, 10 of them may be owned by a company that are renting them. And that does happen more often than I think some people think. Um, and then there's, even single family homes being bought. I mean, I was looking at, now I spent some time on GIS, I think it's GIS it's called, where you could actually click on parcels and see who owns the parcels. Someone
Yep.
had asked me about a parcel that was recently zoned on the west side of Medlock Bridge Road near the Forum Drive, not the Forum, Town Center Drive. And it was the west corner of that. And someone had bought it. And obviously they're going to be developing stuff there. Um, but then, you mentioned, there are companies, there are landowners, let's say, that own land with retail on it that have a lot of parking space, and they've been talking to the city about possibly doing something a bit different. Um, but they're stopping too, right? I mean, just because of the way the market is.
Yeah, I mean, you can drive through Peachtree Corners, and there are a number of locations in which you look at it. They were built back when the core units were built way off the road and
Right.
at the back of a sea of parking,
Yeah.
um, both retail and some commercial. And so, there's locations that we all can think of, the Ingles Shopping Center at, East Jones Bridge and Peachtree Parkway. You've got
Hmm.
the Goodwill Shopping Center there at
Right.
Spalding and Peachtree Parkway. You can go down to PIB and Holcomb Bridge Road, where
Hmm.
the old LA Fitness was, another big, even where Outback Shopping Center used to be at
Right.
PI
Right.
at what is that, Holcomb Bridge and Spalding.
Spalding.
Those are ones where you've got underutilized parking, that is
A lot
ripe.
of parking. Yeah.
Yes, that is ripe for anything as small as an out parcel
Hmm.
is added to the
Yeah.
current layout, or some cases developers have approached us and said, developers of even the ones that I mentioned have said, hey, we're open to what could we do? What happens if we scrape the whole thing and start it all over? What
Right.
would the city let us do? And you get back into what do we
Yeah.
need? Using housing types are oftentimes a component of it. How much
Yeah.
ownership,
Multi
how much
use. Right.
rental, and
Right.
all that kind of stuff. Things that are being discussed right now on the comp plan. Our comprehensive plan is
Hmm.
being rewritten. If you have to do every 10 years, and housing is a very important component of the conversation being had right now. How much of our, both how much of our housing stock should be ownership versus rental,
Hmm.
and how much of our housing stock should be either of those two things in specific areas, and how dense should we get, and
Right.
should we, if we are wanting to grow, do we want to grow out through annexation, or do we not want to do that, but do we want to, to grow, we've got to grow up,
Right.
becoming more dense, or do we want to put a sign at our city limits saying, no more growth in Peachtree Corners. This is it. I mean, I don't
I
know if
don't
there's
know. Yeah.
necessarily a right or wrong answer. I'm not here to advocate for one of them, but those are all
Yeah.
those are all questions that have to be answered. Is what do we want the city to look like over the next 5 to 25 years? We've got to create some policy around zoning and a future land use map that shows
Hmm.
kind of what mayor and council's goal is for how the community's developed, and mayor and council gets input for them to make
Hmm.
that decision based on community input, which is what the comp plan process is all about.
Right. I think the first public meeting has already happened. There's another one being set up, I think, with United Peachtree Corners Civic Association, unless that one passed already.
No, that hasn't passed. We've had two, the planning commission meeting last week,
Hmm.
last Tuesday, had a portion
Right.
of it that was reserved for it, but there's like five or six. And if anybody wants to provide input on any part of the way they think the city should be moving into the future, whether it's housing, transportation, public
Right.
safety, what have you. We will take comments about that at any point. There's a link on our website. You can provide input. You could say, you know, I
Right.
want, all of our roads to be, 6 lanes, or I want, our own police department, or I never want a police department, other than
Right. Right.
whatever. Provide comments. This is the time for you to put it on record,
Hmm.
comments about some of these things, or attend the meetings. And there are always times, each meeting kind of has a theme, but at the end of it, when it's time for the public to come and provide comment, you can comment on
Right.
anything, but these are important decisions.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
I'll put the links into the show notes so this way people can see it. And we've been sharing that on social
yes,
media anyway. So it's out there. I mean, there's no reason that anyone can say I didn't know. I mean, unless you have your head in the ground,
I was
there's
going to say
just no way.
somebody will, Rico. I mean, somebody
Yes,
will.
apparently. There's always people that do that. I just
Yep,
found out about it, even though for
yes,
this last 6 months is being put out. Yeah. So, um, yeah, no, it's a tough thing, right? Do you
it is.
decide that you don't want more development? No, no, you can't decide not to have more development. The thing is, like you said, this plan is really a plan that every 10 years has to be redone. Every 5 years it has to be updated. It's a guide, not a Bible. It's not, you know, a contract set in stone.
Correct.
These are just guidelines. And like you said, really, there is not much land to. I don't foresee any more places where you could put single family homes at a reasonable price, right? There'd be $1 million homes, I think, there because there's just no place to do that. 100 foot frontage on single family homes, or even 60 foot frontage. I think that's gone. I
I
think
would
right
agree.
now, right? I
I
mean,
would agree.
right
I mean,
now,
you want to do that, you got to go up into North Forsyth County.
right?
And, that's where those things are
Yeah,
happening. We are at a point where we're transitioning into, what, Brookhaven is, what
correct.
Dunwoody is. They don't
Yes.
have any more undeveloped land. So really they're in redevelopment mode. And in
Hmm.
their case, as opposed to us, we actually have the ability to annex. We can grow our boundaries.
Right. And they
Brookhaven
can't.
and Dunwoody are completely hemmed in. There is nowhere else. So what they
Yeah.
are, what their city limits are
Hmm.
is going to be what it is forever. And so now
Yeah.
they've got to, how are we going to redevelop? Are we going to, you know, make it, facilitate growth in a dense way, which
Yeah.
means you got to go up? Are we going to not do that and just keep, I mean, these aren't easy questions. And again,
No,
I don't know if it's right or wrong
but
answer, but it's important.
there, and it's good to have input because you don't live in a silo, right? I mean, the city doesn't know everything, and there are citizens here, right? The citizens here that don't want further development, for example, or citizens that don't want more apartments, um, and then citizens that feel, it wouldn't be bad to be like Brookhaven. They moved here. They've moved here in less than a decade, let's say, and some of them have moved out from a Brookhaven or a Buckhead, then they wouldn't mind having more development similar to that, and yet still have some space, if you will, right? So, like you said before, I mean, you have some of these areas where you have a sea of parking spaces that certainly can become mixed use. Maybe they can become, um, equity property like condos, where they're going up 7, 8 stories. Because some of those places they can do that
Yep.
because they don't have single family residential behind them. Some of them can do it differently. Um, but you're right. I mean, we can either annex or we're going to have to go up. There's really no other, or stop. And if you stop development, that's really bad, I think, for a community you can't be in a thriving community and there's no development.
I mean, you're right. While it's an option, within reason, I mean, if somebody has a parcel, they have a legal right to develop it.
Hmm.
So, you can't, there's no such a thing as a literal freeze button, but you can
Right.
have the zoning such that you really aren't letting any more density happen. And so as a result, it to a degree does freeze it. But historically speaking, communities that have kind of taken that stance,
Hmm.
what they find is they may have for a period of time, kind of stopped development, which some people want. But what
Hmm.
they find is the communities around them that haven't, all of a
Right.
sudden, they leave the community that did want to kind of stop, they leave them behind.
Yeah.
So, a community that says, oh, we like it just the way it is. Well, the
Right.
world moves on, and the just the way it is may end up being to where your community isn't looked at as an appealing community
Yeah.
anymore because you're not doing anything. You're not getting young blood. You're not getting, different demographics,
Hmm.
different age groups. And all of a sudden, people start pointing to that community to say it's a dead community.
Yeah,
And
I think of Mount Carmel in California when they wanted to stop development there. And Mount Carmel is on the west coast, of California. It's essentially a tourist city. I think I forget who
isn't that
was.
right there, Monterey Bay, Monterey, California?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And the idea was to stop development essentially within the city proper, because it still had like this nice old feel and ocean feel to it and stuff. I can understand that because it's a tourist spot. Okay, it's a whole different thing. We are not a tourist spot. No one comes here necessarily for anything specific. I mean, it just doesn't. I can say that. I've lived here for a while. I mean, yes, when we have concerts, people will come for the concerts, but we're not a tourist location. We're not a place that has 10 festivals going on through the year, at least not yet. We have an iconic, Peachtree Corners Festival that goes on, but other cities have, you know, 5 or 6 different festivals going on through the year, big ones too, not little ones, beer and wine fests and stuff like that. Um, think of
Yeah,
Johns
we
Creek
are
like around
not,
this way.
when you're a community that has, just under 50,000 people and just
Hmm.
under 50,000 jobs, we are a very vibrant community, meaning there is a lot of activity here.
Right,
Berkeley Lake might be able to get away with saying we're freezing it right here
right.
because they have that one little sliver of retail there at, what is it, South Oak Peachtree and
Hmm.
PIB.
Hmm.
And then the rest is residential, really around the lake. You could potentially get
Yeah,
away with it there, to say,
yeah,
look, no more density, no more, we are what we are. And their
yeah.
redevelopment would be parcel by parcel if somebody wanted to demo one of the houses and build a new
Right.
one.
And they
But
have
they
property
serve a
tax.
specific purpose. They will not, they're not going to sit here and say, oh, we're, trying to be this really big. They are
Mm-mm.
a hidden gem of a bedroom community
Yeah.
around this lake, and so they could maybe get away with it, but it would be hard for us to and
Yeah.
and stay vibrant in the way that we are now.
Right. And Berkeley Lake is a whole different animal, right? One of the
It is.
richest per capita places in the city, or the richest city in the state, or something like that.
Yeah, they got the highest median income
Right.
and median home value of any city. And
Yeah.
for a while, it was, like in the southeast. I know it's still in Georgia. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a
Hmm.
unique type of thing. It's, almost like a large HOA with
Right.
a
Yeah.
little bit of,
Essentially.
and that's great. But yeah,
Yeah.
for you to be an actual community that's really got a lot of jobs or whatever, it's awful hard. So if you
Yeah.
get to the point where you're like, well, we don't want to go that route, then it's either do we grow out or do we grow up?
Yeah.
And then whichever way you decide, what mix of growth does that,
Well,
encompass? Is it,
and the comprehensive plan allows for it to be segmented. So it's not like we have to make that decision as a citywide thing, but we can say, well, you know what, Technology Park or certain areas, industrial areas, can be a certain way because there's more density there. It's a different not more density, but it's a different layout of land. So segmenting the density in certain parts of the city is not a bad thing, right?
The
And
most important, right? And the most important document that comes out of the comp plan is something called the future land use map,
mhm,
and that is a zoning map that shows what character areas mayor and council want the city to look like over the next 5 to 25 years. And it
right,
doesn't go parcel by parcel. It does more like areas.
right,
It would almost be like example would be like we want Peachtree Parkway to be a retail corridor along the parkway, like the
hmm,
parcels that are right basically up against Peachtree Parkway. We want it to be
right,
retail all the way up that corridor. It's kind of broad brush stuff,
hmm,
but it does allow, like you said, the ability to segment certain parts of the city and say,
yeah,
here's an area of the city that we think should be mixed use or should be single family residential or could be a rental specific product or could
right,
be a dense ownership product like condos.
hmm,
It's a way for them to kind of more broadly say that's a good area for this or that. And so that's the most important product that comes out of it because it's a visual, you know, depiction of what council hopes that the zoning
right.
over the next X amount of years results in is that's the future land use map that we aspire to have in the future. And it is a map that council refers to
Hmm.
and planning commission refers to when they are considering zoning. It's not a binding document, but it certainly carries weight, both in the decision or even in if there's any litigation over a zoning
Right.
decision.
I was just going to say, I mean, because you can then either deny or approve based on that, and no one can say, well, you're making an arbitrary decision
That's
on this.
correct.
It's no, we're working with the comp plan. Does that comp plan also includes the overlays, like the entertainment overlay district?
Yes.
It includes all that. So any of that, and those things can be expanded as well, probably, and adjusted depending on, what you want to include in it. Yeah.
So it's a part of it. Now I will say that the comp plans the due date for the comp plan to be submitted to the Georgia Department of Community Affairs is probably going to prevent the there's some overlays that are being considered right now
Hmm.
that may not make it as part of the comp plan. The comp plan's conversation includes all of our existing overlays,
Okay.
but there are some other ones like the Downtown Development Authority
Hmm.
is going to be considering looking at the overlay for Tech Park Atlanta,
Okay.
just Tech Park and seeing if there's some parts of it we want to tweak because we've really put a premium on us making sure Tech Park Atlanta is healthy because it
Hmm.
is the driver of a lot of activity, including its boundaries being shared by Curiosity Labs boundaries. It's a very much an economic development engine
Right.
for us. So we want to make sure it's firing on as many cylinders as we can get it to fire on. So there could be some additional overlay tweaks or districts
Mm.
that follow because you can create them at any time.
Right.
Um,
Right. And they can be added. Okay. Um, all right. I think I just want to, one more thing I think I want to just cover because I'm just inherently interested in it. And that was that pickleball um, idea that we talked about last time. And the city is going to move ahead, I guess, with the feasibility study on the pickleball center, is what we were discussing, 40 or 50 courts.
yeah, so with pickleball's growing popularity,
Mhm.
there is certainly evidence, at least to our naked eyes, not being necessarily experts per se in that just one thing, but there's some evidence that's, we're seeing that it might in and of itself be a driver of unique, call it, ancillary and tertiary activity, meaning you could maybe have a pickleball facility at a certain location and its construction would then create, an energy around it where others would want to get close to it. And it could
Hmm.
be the driver of economic development at a certain location in the city. But that could be, if we're talking about a facility that has 30 to 50 pickleball courts, and its purpose is to pull activity to it during the week for league play and on
Right.
weekends for tournaments, it could be an investment by somebody,
Hmm.
whether it's the city, private, sector, or a combination thereof. It's a significant investment, and so you want to make sure that you're doing it at a good time. The need is there, like you think it might be. Like, there is in fact enough demand. You're not inadvertently going to be cannibalizing somebody's activity that already exists. You'd hate
Right.
to build a 50 court pickleball facility for tournaments only to find out later on that 15 miles down the road another city is ahead of you or already built one, and
Right.
now you can
Right.
be trying to compete for the same tournaments.
Yeah.
And then you got to make sure you don't do anything that might hurt existing business,
Hmm.
things like that. So a feasibility study by an
Yeah.
expert to come in and look at the entire landscape and come back and tell us, is the demand there? Are we filling a niche that hasn't been met? Or can we do it without hurting any existing things? Do you have
Hmm.
the interest in the area that you'll pull in? Are there enough pickleball tournaments that it makes sense to do it? And would it fill hotel rooms, all that kind of stuff? And
Right.
I think if it comes back favorably, I think council, mayor and council here are, our community doesn't realize how lucky they are either. And I do,
Hmm.
because I work for them as a board, but they are very open to creative ways to generate economic development in the city as a way to make sure the community is vibrant. We have a
Hmm.
mix of things. And two, for us to go as long as we possibly can into the future without having to have city property tax. And
Yes.
the
Right.
result, mayor and council are very supportive of efforts that might do this. Hence why we have some of these unique events. I mean, we got this
Mhm.
bike race, the criterium coming, that might be a unique event that drives activity that in the future,
Hmm.
maybe it's something we do all along, or maybe it's a one-time thing. We do it and we look back and we're like, didn't move the needle. But
Right.
they're very open and aggressive on what can we do to drive activity in this city so that
Yeah.
we can be vibrant. We can have a whole host of quality of life offerings here, and our commerce, our business to customer interaction is generating enough revenue that we don't have to have property tax. And we've been successful for 10 plus years, and we're going to
Yeah.
continue to
You
do
all.
as we
I
can.
mean, the leadership on down has done a great job, I think.
Yeah.
There may be people that would argue that, but I see things like companies like Smart Mile joining Curiosity Labs ecosystem, if you will. They're continuing to bring in startups into that organization. I see businesses like Henry's Bakery opening, like Julia's Bakery opening up in the Forum. That we just published some renderings on that. That looks great as an Italian, as someone with Italian heritage. I can't wait to see how that's going to be because it's supposed to be all authentic ingredients from Italy.
Yep.
So that'll be interesting because otherwise I'd have to go downtown or something into Atlanta to get stuff like that. So there's a lot going on here, and I think you're right. The city leadership is always looking at a variety of different things. I mean, from even thinking about an art center and still talking about that, about possible other types of programs or things
Yep.
that the city can come up with. So
And
I'm
and Rico, this one may be also some something to do an article on as well. But we created an incubator in the city
Hmm.
to help create jobs. Because in economic development, your goal is to, when it comes to jobs, to help companies expand. You want to retain or recruit or create. Those are the four legs of the economic development stool, if you will.
Hmm.
And incubators help create jobs. It allows a very low cost way for a company to create from scratch a new
Hmm.
thing. Well, we're getting ready to have, another example, probably the largest example to date of a company that was incubated at Curiosity Lab, which started out as Prototype Prime.
Right.
And they
Yeah.
are going to leave and expand into commercial space elsewhere in Peachtree Corners, and that's Trellis.
Oh, okay.
And so Trellis is leaving the incubator. They've outgrown it, but they're staying here in Peachtree Corners. So this is a company that didn't exist before it was incubated here.
Hmm.
They created a company in the agricultural space with sensors, and they've grown and outgrown our incubator. And now they're becoming a full fledged company in commercial space. And they've stayed here, which means that we have new jobs, or if you, I guess you could, consider it retained jobs that were created here. And
Right.
that's the whole purpose of having incubators here is you create new jobs or a new company, and then your hope is that they stay here when they outgrow your incubator because they've all made housing decisions
Hmm.
based on where they were initially, and now they want to stay here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's a good news story of a company that made it or is making it, and
Yeah.
they're going to be a corporate tenant of the city and stay here.
It'll be fun to see these companies come out like that. I mean, I remember Trellis. I think we did a small piece on it a couple of years ago. They've been there for, I think, since Prototype Prime almost, if I remember
Yeah, it was.
correctly.
They've been there a little bit longer.
Yeah.
With COVID, we let them stay there a little bit longer than the
Yeah.
3 years we generally want companies to leave. But COVID kind of
Yeah.
threw
Yeah.
a lot of wrench in in the mix. But yeah, I mean, it's just great. But just though, if mayor and council hadn't supported having an incubator, you
Hmm.
know, continuing to provide resources to it, this would
Yeah.
not have happened. And so they're
Yeah.
going to end up paying business license, or occupational tax to be a business out in the community.
Right.
So generating revenue for us. And they've got some of their employees that live in Peachtree Corners. So
Yeah.
this is, the little things add up, but we're all about making sure that we are a vibrant economic, we have a vibrant local economy, and that's what
Yeah.
drives our revenue and keeps us from having to have city property tax.
Well, like always, Brian, we do a lot of, we get to learn a lot from you about what's going on in the city. So I do appreciate you giving us the time to be able to talk about these things. Um, Especially something like this where we were able to talk about quite a few things and some of it in general, but certainly to be able to find out a little bit more about the development work that's going on commercially in the city and housing wise and all that. There's going to be a lot more to talk about in the next few months because of the nature of what's going on with the comp plan and all that. And I'm sure there will be even more development going on that we don't even know about yet. Um,
Yeah, I mean, people haven't stopped kicking tires and looking. It might
yeah.
be, you can argue it's a little bit harder to do right now than it was a
Hmm.
year ago. But there are still companies that are wanting to do it. In fact, some companies feel like this is a great time to do it because
Right.
everybody else is stopped, and so they might be able to get into a market they wouldn't. It would have been harder to get into. But look, Rico, things
Yeah.
change quickly, and I appreciate the city appreciates you giving us a vehicle in which we can communicate some of this stuff to those of our residents who care and listen to this. It's an invaluable resource that we're lucky to have. So thanks for letting us have this opportunity every month.
Well, thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Appreciate your comments, and it's worth doing. I mean, I live here since '95. My kids have grown up here, gone to school here. It's just a great community. So I'm always having fun of finding out new things that are happening here, and learning about new people that have moved here and are doing things. So it's always great. Thank you, Brian, for being with
Yep.
us. Everyone else, thanks again for joining us. Check out the latest issue of Peachtree Corners magazine. And we're working currently on Southwest Gwinnett Magazine, which will be profiling some of the businesses that we've just mentioned. We're going to be doing a feature story about entrepreneurs and enterprises here in Peachtree Corners. So check that out. That'll be out in another probably month or so. But thanks again for joining us, and go visit livinginpeachtreecorners.com for what you need to know about the city and what's going on here.